James, let's start. Charlie has lots of thoughts on migration, but you will too. Has anybody got a grip of this? Because Labour are saying, they're saying today, look, we've 13,460 people been removed since Labour won a landslide, but how many have arrived on small boats?
Small coming in.
Yeah, 21,306. So that's more.
Well, I mean, I think that what they're discovering is the same thing the Conservatives discovered, which is it's an incredibly difficult thing to solve, and the causes of the problem are overseas, and so. Yvette Cooper, Home Secretary, visited Giorgia Meloni earlier this week, and it's part of a wider diplomatic push, all of which is aimed at trying to kind of choke off the source of illegal migration at source.
Will it work?
I don't know, but it kind of has to. I mean, to the point you got into earlier. I mean, I think one of the problems we have is that this has become too much of a political football. It is perfectly reasonable that it is of political concern, but some of the things that particularly the last government tried, so on Rwanda, for example, simply have not worked, and it was an expensive diversion.
Will someone say it wasn't given a chance to work and they themselves sabotaged it, some would argue, because Rishi Sunak kept saying, well, the flights will take off, but after the election, if you elect me, and he was never going to be elected.
Yeah, well, he was never going to be elected, and I'm not completely convinced that if you're a candidate to get in a small boat, you're necessarily going to be paying attention to the vagaries of British politics. But to be honest, the idea that if you come over, you might be put on a plane to Rwanda, I just fail to see that was ever a sufficient deterrent. What it was a massive diversion of resources away from a system which was already under strain into a complete red herring. And actually what we need is a government that is focused on, against a real problem, in the context of a real problem, actually making the system work.
OK, Charlie, what are your thoughts on what Chris Philp has said and what James Dowling has said?
I think that there's a few elements to this problem, two of which I think a lot of people focus on, but one of which I don't hear anybody speak about. The first is the fact that a lot of this is because of incompetence, right? A lot of the small boats problem is because of civil service incompetence, people who are just not, doing their jobs properly and are therefore...
What should they be doing?
Well, it's, I mean, the rate at which illegal migrants are processed, for one thing, is a problem. It's not nearly quick enough for the numbers that are coming in. But the second element is, of course, people who are kind of actively maybe playing a role in facilitating this, whether this is, NGOs or whatever else. But the third part of it is the fact that I think we underestimate the extent to which, advancements in technology and communications and travel and this sort of thing has made migration, in general, legal and illegal, the most kind of pressing issue of our time. And I don't think our state, the actual machinery of our state, is equipped to deal with it. There's nothing more fundamental to a society than the demographics, the people that actually make it up. And so large migrations of people from one part of the world to another is hugely consequential. And I don't think our state is equipped to properly deal with that problem, because we're seeing with this story today that we're supposed to be celebrating the fact that Labour have deported 13,000 people since they came into office. Already we've made the point that there's still a net positive number of illegal migrants have come in. But we're talking in the order of, it's a drop in the bucket, because in 2017, Pew Research put out some research that said that there was as many as 1.2 million illegal migrants residing in Britain. This was 2017.
What is a bigger problem to you of the Centre for Migration Control, illegal or legal migration?
Well, we tend to focus, we focus on both, but we tend to focus on legal migration, because that really, in terms of the numbers, the sheer scale of it, that's what's actually doing a lot more damage to our country.
You think legal migration is doing more damage to our country than illegal migration?
Well, it depends how we define damage. I define damage as making the lives of ordinary people more difficult. And I think that legal migration does that, because it makes it more difficult to get spaces at the GP, makes it more difficult to get spaces in schools, it makes property more expensive, it makes the roads and public transport more clogged and overwhelmed. We've got an infrastructure in this...
It gives us the people to do the services that we can't currently.
And this argument is always trotted out, but what that ignores is, for one thing, the people coming in who are working in, let's say, the National Health Service, they are themselves still using the National Health Service, and they will also generally bring 4, 5, 6 dependents who are also using the National Health Service. So it just completely cancels out and ends up as a net negative. You know, we have infrastructure in this country that was built in the aftermath of the Second World War, built to sustain maybe 50 million people. We're now looking at a situation where official statistics suggest that our population is something like 67 million. But the supermarkets in 2007 were saying then that based on their predictions, the population could be as many as 80 million. This was 2007.
Okay.
And so, sorry,
James, what do you make of what Charlie's saying there?
It would be very It would be very easy to just turn this into quite a binary argument. And actually, I have some sympathy with what Charlie is saying. I do think. I mean, your point about infrastructure, for example. I do think for many years we as a country have not invested sufficiently in our infrastructure. We have not invested sufficiently in, you know, all kinds of different things, housing stock, roads, you know. And you're right, when you've got then a growing population, any increase puts that under pressure. So fair enough, I completely get that. I also think when you're in a kind of low economic growth situation, you know, what you are doing when you increase when you take in more people is just kind of, you know, you're kind of spreading the pie around even more thinly.
Yeah,
so,
because there's this thing. I mean, you're the expert, James. You are an economist, and you will know and can explain this in words that even I can understand. That
not an economist actually, but
I mean, you know your onions when it comes to the economy, but nonetheless, you will be able to explain to even people with my limited intelligence the difference between GDP and GDP per capita.
Yeah.
So this is what the country makes, and basically, as far as I understand, you can say, well, our GDP is growing, that's fabulous, but if you bring in more people, it's probably going to grow because people will be productive. But if it's per person, well, actually, that's not going up to the degree that it needs to.
No, completely. So I think all of that means that you know, high net migration puts real pressure on the country, and I completely get that, completely understand that. I think, though, choking off migration is the wrong answer. You know, what we are seeing are symptoms of a failure to grip other problems, a failure to invest properly in the economy, you know, a failure to invest in our infrastructure, a failure to look properly at the way we kind of build and encourage businesses to grow. And I think that is what we need. That is what we really need to address.
Can you do both at the same time, or do you need to deal with
I think you should.
You need to deal with them in silos?
I think you should do both at the same time, because, you know, we have significant areas of the economy where we are lacking people, where we do need them. Now, we do need legal migration in parts of the economy. You know, the service sector has collapsed since Brexit, or since COVID. I mean, you could kind of say both. The NHS, the care sector, I mean, the care sector is kind of... The ballooning of social care in this country is absolutely devastating local authority budgets. They are massively dependent on immigrant labour, and there's a real question about the economics of that, and whether we should be paying people pretty subsistence wages for that. But nevertheless, that's what's currently happening. If you choke that off, you basically stop. You kill the care sector in this country, which we kind of need.
So how do you deal with that, Charlie?
Well, the other thing that I would say is, as with so many issues in politics, we're so used to speaking about these things purely in economic terms, purely understood in terms of profit and loss. And whilst that is obviously very important, at the same time, there are other issues that, you know, even if it could be shown that mass migration was hugely beneficial to the economy, I still don't think that would make it okay, because of the other effects that it has on people's lives and on the, you know, communities and the culture of places where mass migration takes place. You know, it's hugely alienating for people, I think, if you speak to ordinary people.
So you think the cultural effects actually negate that? What do you think of that point?
Again, I mean, look, I've got some sympathy, and I think my view on this has softened significantly over time. I mean, I completely take the point. I mean, you've got some. And it's very easy for me as a kind of metropolitan liberal to be blasé about this. But you've got some towns which the character of which has completely changed over the.
My town is one of these examples.
Yeah,
you know,
so,
where I live in Kent.
So fine. So I can't really take away from that. What I would say is, I think that's inevitable with population change anyway. I mean, I think it's happening at an alarming rate in certain change and cultural change and change in the nature of places will change. It just will.
Yeah. So if change is inevitable, which I agree that it is, the question is not whether we have change, but what kind of change we have.
We need to manage it.
Yeah. You need to manage it. But migration, particularly from countries whose cultural proximity to ours is distant, like countries in Africa or the Middle East, that is you know, a kind of change that makes ordinary people, generally speaking, quite uncomfortable because they look at their high streets, they look at their towns, they kind of look at the just the kind of culture of their home. Maybe this is where they grew up. I mean, again, speaking from experience, this is the experience that I've had, and it's it's not a positive change. There is such thing as positive change. I think conservative-minded people are sceptical of all kinds of change, but there is such thing as positive change.
Final thought on that from James Dowling.
I think this is an argument for being clear about what the real problem is, and then where immigration, where legal immigration has clear impacts on localities, understanding how you manage that and allocating resources accordingly. I don't think it is per se an argument for just choking off migration, because then I think we are doubling down on the damage we're doing ourselves.
Tell us your thoughts on what James and Charlie have said, and quite a thoughtful discussion, I think, over the last 15 minutes. Herbie in London is our first caller today. He's given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Herbie, what do you make of what Charlie and James have been saying?
Well, Peter, the problem is that the system's completely out of control. Why don't the government admit it? These people are far more intelligent than our MPs and our government at the moment, because they're running rings around them.
There is that problem, Herbie, isn't there? There is that problem in that we innovate and then they innovate. They change their tack. It used to be lorries, then it used to be the Eurostar, then it was lorries, then we rumbled that, now it's small boats, whatever the next thing will be. That it's just that innovation, isn't it? It's people who have what they would see as a need to come to this country. I don't think it is a need, but Herbie, they are the gangmasters certainly are intelligent people getting across this.
Well, of course, but listen, the next thing would be the ferries. They'd be using the ferries to bring them over in hauls, because they're going to get away with it. Listen, it's completely out of control. Why doesn't the government admit it doesn't know what to do?
Well, they say they've got a plan. They say they've got a plan. Stay where you are, Herbie. Just hold on for a second. I'll get the thoughts of James and Charlie, and then I'll come back to you, I promise. Just a final thought on this, just what Herbie was saying there, talking about the gangmasters and indeed the immigrants themselves, or the would-be immigrants, the legal immigrants, innovating and changing their tag. You've looked into this, Charlie.
It's really interesting that you've used that word innovation, because I think that's key. That's the point I was kind of driving at before, which is we are basically, the way we need to think about this issue is we are in an arms race, right? Because there are the gangs, the people smugglers, and then there is the British state. And right now, the gangs are winning, right? Because our state is not equipped to deal with this problem. Because what we should have is a system where if you illegally migrate to the UK, you are deported, removed from the country in the same day, right? That's not an unreasonable expectation of a 21st century.
But it's just not going to happen at the moment,
But it's because we have such a stultified, hulking, massively bureaucratised managerial state that is more interested in, procedure and all these sorts of things than actually getting the job done. And so innovation, if I may just very quickly, innovation in this area is key. And I don't really see that many mainstream political voices saying this, because it's all about, stop the boats and all this sort of thing, but there's no discussion of, okay, how do we actually do that? Because at the moment, we are losing the arms race.
What's your solution, Charlie? I mean, you're saying get processing a lot quicker, and that's a good aim, and I would support that. But does that mean lots more civil servants?
Well, as with so many things, this is a symptom of a more fundamental issue, and the more fundamental issue is the fact that we have a state that employs something like 500,000 people. Like, this is ridiculous. And what people don't understand, the publicly facing elected element of government, the 650 MPs in the House of Commons, that's a drop in the bucket in terms of the actual size of the state. And so there needs to be, you're seeing in America with Elon Musk's DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, something like that I think is absolutely necessary in Britain, because we have this state that's so big, so expensive and so inefficient in getting things done. It's a more fundamental
I know just the man to run the UK version of DOGE, and that is James Dowling. I'm sure you'd get in there, get stuck in.
Well, it would probably be quite a lot of fun, but for me, if not for the people I'm scrutinising. But I think that is if I may, a slight red herring. I mean, you could argue the state doesn't always spend well. And
you could argue that quite convincingly.
Yes, I think there is a fair case for that. And if you look at kind of some of the large bureaucracies that it fosters, the NHS, Department for Work and Pensions,
they're not very efficient. Yes,
both lots of money. There must be waste. I do not think, however, that you are going to get a significant amount of efficiency out of it. I mean, after 2010, the size of the state was cut significantly. Now, it increased through COVID a bit, it increased through Brexit to deal with those specific issues. The issue you have on immigration is, as a country, we have simply never been tooled up to deal with what we're seeing now.
I agree, yeah.
And so I think it's not so much that we are wasting money elsewhere, maybe we are, but simply we need to be concentrating on making a system work, and system work on a scale as an efficiency that we have never seen before.
I'll tell you another measure that does need to
okay, and then I want to go back to Herbie.
Yeah, very quickly. Yeah. Is not just the reform of the structure itself, because that's what we're talking about here, but it's also the individuals who occupy the structure, because that's just as, if not more, important. Because if those individuals are ideologically motivated or possessed, as so much of our civil service is, where they don't want to deal with illegal migration and legal migration for ideological reasons, they are liberals, they are universalists who believe that it's a good thing in all times and places to have migration to your country because diversity is our strength. If you have a civil service that's occupied exclusively, more or less, by those people, as we do, then you're not going to see the problem solved. Whereas if you had a civil service occupied by people who think that migration has done huge damage to Britain and that it is generally a net negative.
I think it's perhaps somewhere in the middle, having worked in the civil service, I must say. Herbie, you're still with us from London. What do you make of what Charlie and James have been saying there?
Well, listen, the whole system's out of control. I mean, you say the border is out of control, the government's out of control. Australia has a solution, or did have a solution, and they seem to be able to control it. We are importing problems. We are hemorrhaging money like nobody's business on illegal immigrants. There is no control. Nobody knows what to do. Why don't they just put their hands up and admit it? We've lost the plot. Completely.
Well, they're not going to do that, Herbie, are they? They're going to say...
Of course not.
Politicians don't do that. They say, look at us, we've got a marvellous solution. It's all going to be fine.
Yeah, but this is the problem, Peter. It's our money yet to go and they're spending and wasting. How the hell can they carry on like this in such a disgraceful state as it is in today? It's unbelievable.
Okay.
You could organise this if you try, could you?
Herbie, thanks for your thoughts there. That's Herbie in London. Just before we go to a break, actually, I want to ask you about the EU Surrender Squad. This is the Mail on Sunday. I'm not sure I have a Mail on Sunday here, actually, but certainly the story is, at the very bottom of the pile, Starmer's Surrender Squad to undo Brexit. The Prime Minister has been accused of betraying the historic 2016 vote to leave the EU. 100-strong Whitehall unit is launched to tie Britain back to Brussels. What do you make of this, James, as an arch Remainer?
I think this is wonderful. I mean,
naturally,
I kind of read this and just, it brought me back to 2019 and all that fun we had then.
PTSD.
Yes, indeed. I just think this is really strange. I mean, halfway down or something, you've got a series of quotes from Kemi Badenoch and Lord Frost. God, I thought we'd forgotten about him. They're basically warning that we might lose the freedoms and opportunities that we get from Brexit. What freedoms? What opportunities? I mean, it's been a complete disaster. I mean, let us be clear. Brexit is working. Brexit is doing what it was supposed to do. It was always designed to make us poorer. It was always designed to make us less relevant. And it is absolutely achieving that. And, if you don't... It is not an unwinding of Brexit to want to ameliorate some of the damage that was done, some of the vandalism that was done by the likes of Lord Frost.
Charlie, you're like a coiled spring. Go.
Well, I'm going to be honest here, right? I agree that Brexit has not been a success. It's because I don't think Brexit has been carried out properly.
Like communism.
Yes, of course, it's never been tried. Real communism, real Brexit has never been tried.
Indeed.
But if you look at the way that Brexit, the energy around Brexit was co-opted and contained by the Conservative Party, it went from being an expression of basically nationalism, I would say. It went from expression of anti-migration sentiment, pro-sovereignty sentiment, and it was turned into, global Britain, where it was about us being more open to trade with like India and this sort of thing. I think that completely fundamentally undermined Brexit. But with that being said, I mean, I'm pro-Brexit because I think the EU in its current form is not helpful. I think it's more of an impediment to a country's flourishing. With that being said...
Well, look at some of the economies that are not doing well in the EU, France and Germany.
But with that being said, the concept of a European Union, I actually am not against. I think it's actually quite sensible that European nations work together because we are, we are kind of brothers and sisters.
Just not in its current form.
Yeah, because, you look, for example, at migration, which we've been talking about today. This is a problem that is gripping the entirety of Europe, largely, in part at least, because of the EU itself. But if you look at that...
Would you join
a
reformed EU?
If it was an EU that was led by the likes of Jordan Bardella, the National Rally in France, the AfD in Germany, the Freedom Party in Austria, then I would be open to it. I think.
What would it do? I mean, how would it differ fundamentally in terms of the way it runs from what we've got now?
Well, again, I mean, for me, like politics is always a question of who, right? Because who, regardless of what the structure is like and the way that things are done, who gives it the flavour, who gives it the direction. And so, if there was an EU that was, governed in a traditional traditional kind of conservative way, then
by Jordan Bardella,
for instance, yeah, then I don't think that would be a bad thing. With that being said, I think there are still concerns around sovereignty. I think there are still concerns around laws being made in a foreign place and then being imposed on us. I think that is not particularly desirable. But when it comes to collaboration on things like ending illegal migration, dealing with the consequences of legal migration, EU nations working together seems pretty sensible because we're all facing the same issues at the same time.
What's your reaction to that, James?
Well, I mean, I think you can't really just join an EU because it's being run by Jordan Bardella. Because let's assume that he ends up as president or prime minister, through an election. One assumes an election will come along, a subsequent election will come along and change him. So you kind of need to take a view on the basis of the entity that you're joining, based on how it's set up and what its constitution is. I think it would be very easy for us to sit here and for me to take a hard Remainer position, you to take a hard Brexiteer position, and then for us to kind of degenerate into slagging off each other's haircuts or something. So let's try
both
not
great.
Do that.
Cheers.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you, and you're looking wonderful too.
Oh,
by the way.
there's so much love in this room.
I think though. What was the deal that was cut by, what this is about, ignoring the hilarious headline, what this was about was fundamentally the really shabby deal that was cut by Boris Johnson and Lord Frost. Now, we are out. I didn't vote to be out. I would rather not be, but that is where we are, and we are almost certainly not going in ever or for a generation. That does not mean that our situation with our main trading partner should not be made better, given that we just had a discussion about how we haven't got enough economic growth in this country.
Thank you to Gurdeep, who has been in touch and says by the time the general election comes around, there'll be more illegal migrants giving status to stay in the UK, and by then they will be eligible to vote, plus the criminals he's already released and more being released will vote for Labour. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. It's great to hear that Farage has a chance, but I wouldn't get my hopes up yet. Jane has been in touch and says, making who poorer? There are so many people who have nothing already, they cannot lose any more. What this shows is that people who have never accepted the result don't like democracy, and why should we bother voting again? And both Charlie and James know that we are the home of free speech, and sometimes people say things that we may not disagree with, may not even like, and I'm about to read out one from which is slightly personal, pointed comment about James, but James is going to take it on the chin because he's a good man. Tim says, I really like James Dowling. He has demonstrated why the Tories lost and will never be elected again. Keep bringing him on as he's generating support for Reform UK with every banal comment he makes. So there we are. We are the home of free speech. We say things that criticise people. James has taken that on the chin because he's a good man. Well, James Dowling and Charlie Downs are still with me today. James is a former Conservative Special Advisor. In fact, he worked in the Ministry of Justice back in the day, as did I. And perhaps you're the right person to ask about the fact that bungling jail bosses have admitted they released a record number of prisoners by mistake last year. Sex offenders, violent criminals, drug dealers, 87 people were accidentally let out too early. How does this happen, James?
It's
like people being silly, stupid, not doing their job correctly.
Well, all of that. I mean, the discussion we just had about how the system is in place, is bloated, and probably doesn't work properly. And I'm not convinced it's that bloated, but it certainly doesn't work well everywhere. And this is one example. I mean, we've got a record 87 cases. It's not good. They should not be letting people out early. It's a statement of the obvious. And I risk trivialising it by saying what I'm about to say, which is that it's not a lot. In the context of a prison population.
With 80,000 people in it, 87 cases is a tiny number, but I mean, to the people who are victims of those crimes,
totally.
This is, and people, I'm sure, will be very annoyed about this. Totally,
and they should be. And MOJ needs to, the prison service needs to get its house in order.
Okay. Let's get another thought from Charlie on this one, which is Labour telling developers pay for pollution and you can build faster. Labour wants to build 1.5 million homes. Now they're thinking about another levy here. They've also been condemned for allowing a new generation of slum homes. Your thoughts on housing?
See, this is an area, again, that I think, there's a lot of talk about housing and this sort of thing. The first thing to note is the only reason that we need these 1.5 million homes is because of mass migration, because the population of the UK is not growing because of native birth rates. The native birth rate is about 1.5.
It's actually going down.
It's 1.5, so it's actually decreasing. If not for immigration, our population would be going down, which is not desirable. either, but then at the same time importing millions of people from everywhere is not desirable either. And so what we're seeing with this kind of house building programme that Labour want to bring in is like, sure, you know, we might see a decrease, if they do it properly, a decrease in house prices, which is good because, I mean, you know, for young people, I want to buy a house in the next couple of years. Many of my friends are looking at buying houses, and it's so astronomically expensive that it's, you know, it's just not a realistic prospect at any time in the near future. And that, you know, then makes it more difficult to lay down roots. You have less of a stake in society if you're renting. So house building and the ownership of private property is hugely important for the well-being of a society. But when we are paving over the English countryside with these identical, poorly built, poor quality houses that look like they look like they've come out of an IKEA flat pack, that's not desirable either.
Listen, I think there's a lot of snobbery over, I'm not saying you're being a snob, I'm saying there's a lot of snobbery over, you know, Barrett's boxes and all the rest of them. There are a lot of those homes that people would be proud to live in as long as they're built correctly, and that's the issue, isn't it, James?
I completely agree. I've lived in a new build property. One of my first, my last home was a new build property as well. So they can be, you know, high quality, well performing properties. I mean,
but when the question is, do we build over the English countryside? With
I'm all for that.
but
They're all for building over.
Look, 3% of the UK is currently built on.
That's too much.
Well, it's like a haircut, but we can build on more of it. And the green belt, sorry,
the green belt you're talking about, and the grey belt as well as
the green belt was originally created literally to restrict the growth of in particular English cities. So the idea that we cannot build, that there's something sacrosanct about the countryside is simply nonsense, and is stopping people like you getting on the housing ladder.
Well, no, but I would say mass migration is the root cause.
This is where we disagree. So obviously the increase in the population there's some relationship between the increase in the population and our housing needs. However, it is not the only need. You know, we need to build more houses because our existing housing stock is not performing well, is not in the right place, and also as your needs as an individual grow, you develop a family, you develop kids, you need different kinds of property. Okay. All of that means you need to build new.
20 seconds from Charlie just to respond to that point.
You know, this land is our inheritance, right? It's not just an economic zone. It's not just quantitative. There is a qualitative aspect to this country that people, you know, in the halls of power don't recognise it, because there is something about, you know, this beautiful garden that is this country that's not just like, it's not just the wild. This is a cultivated, man-made environment that our ancestors have given us, and what we are, you know, what the current generation of people are choosing to do is pave over that to make houses for immigrants.
Tell us your thoughts on all of this, on housing, on immigration, on those being let out of prison.